Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon po.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. Yes po.
This will be
Good
just a very
afternoon,
short
sir.
meeting. Okay. I just want to process your last discussion about those different theories, particularly on behaviorism, cognitive, and humanistic approaches. So to make things clear on the air, no, clarifying everything about it, we shall discuss that one shortly this afternoon. And again, we shall have our examination on Friday. And so at least before the examination, we get to somehow discuss all of these things. So andito ba yung mga reporter ng behavioral approaches? So with the humanistic approaches and cognitive approaches, may I know sino yung hindi nakapag-report dito? I think merong hindi naka-report. Hello? Okay, so can I start? Sino yung reporter ng classical conditioning? Andito ba si Miss Paraiso? Yes. Maricar, do you have question?
Kami yung reporter ng classical conditioning, sir.
Okay. Pablo's classical conditioning. Sino kasama mo?
Si Ma'am Paraiso po.
Okay. So, going back to the classical conditioning, ano yung, I will be raising this question, no, to those reporters concerned. Miss Maricar, what is now the implication of Pablo's classical conditioning to the principles of learning? Can you help the class, no? Relating now this particular classical conditioning to the principles of learning.
Okay. Sorry sir, naglalakad pa kasi ko sa highway. Ano sir, for us po, sa pagkakaintindi ko sir sa classical conditioning na diniscuss namin, same sa ginawang example ni Pavlov when it comes to dogs, no, na meron siyang parang nako-condition yung stimulus niya kapag nakakarinig siya ng bell, nakakarinig siya ng may condition na bell, tapos ang nasa isip niya is parang food. So, yung mind niya is may neutral na condition. Now, when he hears the bell, kasama na yung amoy, sir, no? Yung smell ng food, no? Nako-condition yung mind niya na meron pong pagsiserve na food. Same po sa learning, sa atin naman po, no? Sa teaching or sa learning, diba, ang mindset natin is every time na papasok tayo ng school, we will actually gonna receive learning. So parang ganun sir yung masasabi kong relationship lang on my own opinion po.
Okay, so what particular classroom routines, no, would this classical conditioning be useful? If you can at least cite an example of a classroom routine. Can you cite a classroom routine where this is particular conditioning applicable?
If ever sir applicable po ba yung I'm not really quite sure pero I will gonna give my thought. Yung paggising natin, 'di ba? Example, if you are a student, paggising mo, you have already the routine like yung mga daily routine, tapos like brushing, taking a bath, and so on and so forth, wearing clothes, then going to school. I'm not sure if papasok ba yun siya doon, sir.
Okay, that could be no an example of kind of classical conditioning that is routinary for any learners to perform no, on a daily basis in coming to school. Another example of a classical conditioning that is done routinary in a classroom setting is, let's say, for example, yung ating routine every day to undergo flag raising ceremony. No? So when the bell will ring for at around 7:15, for example, if 7:15 is the start of the ceremony, that gives already a signal to all learners that they have to fall in line in the plaza and what is form their lines, no? Getting ready for the flag raising ceremony. So the same goes with that. No? So this classical conditioning is very useful in the principles of learning. That is, for example, the routinary in the classroom rules that is actually done mostly in setting of standards for the classroom rules before you do your teaching, or a kind of conditioning also that you can done for your classroom management. Another thing is, for example, no it will become your classical conditioning in the class that when before they enter the classroom after the flag raising ceremony, they have to again fold their lines, no, and they have to stamp their feet to remove some mga dusts on their shoes, no, or to at least somehow do checking of attendance. No, that would be the another way, no, for you to check attendance and etc. So there could be so many, no, kind of classical conditioning that is done in a classroom setting. So with that, I just wanted you to remember this can be done, no, in your classroom management and even in your teachings, no, the kind of conditioning that is being shared to us by Pavlov. Another thing, no, this is also a practical way of understanding the connection of a stimulus and a stimuli. Okay, and this response, no, when for example, the gaya na sinabi ng reporter, they were using a dog and the bell, no. So there are mga ano, no, there could be a possibility if when the bell is being ring, no, there will be no response at all. Okay, so there could be, especially at the very first time na magkakaroon ka ng conditioning, there could be some resistance, in short. No? And the same goes with setting of standards or probably employing, no, discipline in the classroom situations wherein there could be resistance coming from all types of learners. So there is no response at all. No? That's just at least before conditioning. But during conditioning, for example, when you bell again, no, there will be a neutral stimulus. No? You may show some I don't know, parang a motivation. So with the situation given by Pavlov, there was a meat, no, shown to the dog, and the response of the dog was what, Miss Rosemary? What was the response of the dog upon seeing the meat?
Sir, sa ano ko, sa ano to, yung response po ng dog dun sa pag ano po niya sa meat, nag-salivate na po siya, sir, kasi
Okay, very
syempre,
good. So there was a salivation, ibig sabihin naglalaway, no? So why is that, no? Na yun yung response niya upon seeing a meat. Because for a dog, a meat is a food. And when they get to eat food, no, ano siya, no? Parang tawag dito, ibig sabihin, they would fill in their tummies. And with that, no, they can condition themselves now to be in good mood, no, and in good condition. The same as humans, diba? Sometimes our way of classical of conditioning ourselves, no, in a classical manner is by eating foods. Okay, so ginagawa natin yan. Minsan nga sinasabi niyo pa, stress eating. No? Stress eating. So pag stress ka, kumakain ka. So by eating, nako-condition yung self mo. No? So that's why you are looking for food that craves you. No? So this is also done no, even in our natural way. Hindi na natin alam, it's a way of classically conditioning ourselves no, para to satisfy us. So therefore, no, after that conditioning, there will be now a conditioned stimulus and the salivation, no, conditioned response din. Ibig sabihin, the response could be okay naman, no, positively, hindi na mag-bark yung dog, no, when for example, provided na siya with that meat. The same with us, diba? If you are hungry, for example, and then you get to perform in your day-to-day teaching, diba? You cannot perform well unless if you eat first and you think that it's your way of conditioning yourself. Then after you eat, you will have more energy to teach. So this is a kind of also no, an explanation of our natural needs as human beings to condition ourselves no, on a certain stimuli, no, with the use of a certain stimulus. I mean, okay. So this is somehow no that you condition to associate yourselves to a particular object, so not necessarily food, no? And then yun na nga no, meron lang sigurong mga different principles na i-introduce si Pavlov no? So I will not discuss further on that kasi ang gusto ko lang is that you know what it means when we say classical conditioning. Ibig sabihin, pag sinabi classical conditioning, yung maisip nyo always is the dog with a certain stimulus and a stimuli, you know, and the response of the dog upon seeing the meat. So that's the very basic concept of understanding classical conditioning. So we just actually failed no, to discuss further on the different parts and subcomponents of the classical conditioning, but in our probably no in the future you will get to encounter this again, and I wanted you to just go deeper on your understanding for this particular theory, because for sure this will come out in the board examinations. So yun lang yun no, ang dapat nating maintindihan. So in Pavlov's experiment of the classical conditioning, remember that before conditioning you have the ringing the bell, or that's what we call the neutral stimulus, and then it was probably no response at all based from of course no some resistance no, at first glance or at first ano ng tao or ng dog. The same with us. No? Sometimes you don't respond at the first glance. So there will be tawag nito, that's because before conditioning yan. No? And then placing food, that's actually an unconditioned stimulus in front of the dog initiated salivation. So that's now a conditioned response. And then during the conditioning, the bell was rung a few seconds before the dog was presented with the food. So after the conditioning also, the ringing of the bell, conditioned stimulus alone produced salivation, that's a conditioned response. Then this is a classical conditioning. Okay? So ganun lang. So that ringing of bell gives signal now to the dog to eat that stimuli. No? So that's now a conditioned response. Now moving on, the next theory was about operant conditioning. So what is naman operant conditioning? Can I ask the reporter to give me now the Skinner's operant conditioning implication to a classroom setting? Miss Reyes, are you here?
So,
Yes, please. Okay, by the way, in addition, Miss Reyes, are you here? Miss Reyes. Okay. In addition, no, while Miss Reyes is preparing for the question, There are also some finding of Pavlov's no through classical conditioning. Yung ating stimulus generalization that once a dog has learned to salivate at the sound of the bell, no, the moment na mag-salivation siya, it will salivate at the other similar sounds. So, isa yan. That's a general stimulus. At the moment nagkaroon siya ng salivation, no, at the sound of the bell, so it will salivate at other similar sounds. Kapag may narinig pa rin siyang similar sounds and that will give him already that a conditioned response to salivate. Okay? And then, yung extinction natin dyan, no? If you, for example, stop pairing the bell with the food. Ibig sabihin, kapag may food and then you stop ringing the bell, you stop pairing ba? No? Yung bell pati yung food, salivation will eventually cease in response to the bell. Kasi pag wala siyang narinig na bell tapos may food, it will cease. No? There will be no salivation. It's a classical conditioning. Ibig sabihin, condition the dog pairing food and the bell. Okay, so yung ating spontaneous recovery dyan, extinguished responses can be recovered then after an elapsed time. So, that's just an additional ano lang din. Yes, Miss Ines Reyes, can you share us the implication, no? With us to the implication of Boris F. Skinner operant conditioning to classroom setting? Yes, I'm asking you, Miss Reyes. I was just trying to add on to my idea earlier before you will proceed to your answer. Okay, for Borisov Skinner naman, just like Pavlov, Watson's, and Thorndike, no, Skinner believed on the concept of stimulus response pattern of conditioning behavior. So the same lang naman sila dito, but Skinner is focusing on the other area, no, using this kind of conditioning to motivation and what is this, punishment. Okay, so his theory actually zeroed, no, and only on changes in observable behavior, no, and it actually differs. One thing that is different from the work of Boris Skinner is that of the three behaviorists before him in that stand operant behavior, or it's actually a voluntary behaviors used in operating on in the environment. His theory came to be known, no, as an operant conditioning, which is based on the notion that learning is a result of a change in overt behavior. If there is an overt behavior a changes of an overt behavior, and then learning comes in, no? These changes in behavior are the result ng ating individual response to events, or yung tinatawag natin as stimuli. Okay, it's an individual response to events that occur in the environment. So depende kung ano yung surrounding environment ng isang tao. So we respond to that. If basic concept of responding to the stimuli on our surroundings is, for example, if we have our environment that's very noisy, no, disturbing yung sound, our normal response would usually covering our ears, no, we get irritated. So that's also a kind of responding to this stimuli. The stimuli now are the noise that surrounds us. Okay? So our response, no, produces a consequence, such as, for example, defining a word, no, we hit a ball, no. Probably din kapag halimbawa maganda yung ating classroom, yun yung sinasabi natin na conducive learning yung ating classroom, we could be able to solve on that problem properly. No, that's also a kind of conditioning. Kasi sinasabi natin dito, in this kind of conditioning, classroom has actually a very big part, no, in the learning of the learners. So sinasabi natin always that if we have a very good classroom with a very conducive type of classroom for learning, so therefore learning is better no, compared to yung yung mainit na classroom, for example, lack of chairs, no, maingay na surroundings, and etc. So now, just take note that Forrest Scaler has two types of reinforcement. No? He used this reinforcement um, no, to further the understanding of the responses. No? So when you say reinforcer, it is anything that strengthens the desired response. Whatever is the what is this no the certain situation reinforces now would trigger no, would reinforce to the desired response ng ating responder no. There is a positive reinforcer at meron din tayong tinatawag na negative reinforcer. So for positive reinforcer no, it is any stimulus no that is given or added to increase the response. So kapag nag-i-increase siya ng response, it would now be very helpful also to the performance. No? Example, if the teacher would get a promise to extra time in the play area to children who behave well during the lesson, so that is a positive reinforcement. No? Or for example, a mother who promises a new cell phone for her son who gets good grades. And usually, ito yung ginagawa talaga ng mga parents. No? We do positive reinforcement in giving motivation to our children just for them to perform better in the classroom. So we do positive reinforcement. So sa motivation, ginagawa din natin yan. No? Let's say, sa classroom teaching, for example. When you group them, sinasabi natin, those who are behaved, di ba? Kapag nag-groupings tayo, you group them 1 through 5, and then you give this rule in the class that for those who are behaved, for those who will participate, you will be giving them 5 points additional on their performance. So that's a positive reinforcement. While the negative reinforcement is the other way around. No? It will result in an increased frequency of a response when it is withdrawn or removed. No? So, for example, a particular teacher would announce that a student who gets an average grade of, for example, 95 for the 2 grading periods will no longer take the final examination. So, the negative reinforcing now is removing the final exam. Tinanggal mo yung final exam. No? So, which we realize it's a form of reward for working hard and getting an average grade of 1.5. For example, yun na din, no? Yun na nga, first quarter, second quarter, if you will get a grade of 90 above, you will be the student will be excluded from taking the periodic examination comes third quarter. So, it's a kind of reinforcement, but what is the negative reinforcer there is yung pag-take away mo ng periodic examination sa bata. And they will now be working hard, no? Working very, very hard to get a grade of 90 above, just to be able to be excused from taking the examination on the third quarter. So for first and second quarter, they need to get a grade of 90. So that's a negative reinforcer. No? Removing the periodic examination in the third quarter will now be a form of reward, no, for working hard and getting an average grade of 90 above. Okay, so that's what you call a negative reinforcer. Now, a negative reinforcer is actually different from a punishment, no? Because a punishment is a consequence indeed to result in reduced responses. You would now be reduced responses. A punishment could also even pressure, give more pressure to the learner, no? So, an example for this, no, for example, a student who always comes late is not allowed to join a group work that has already begun. Usually, teachers do this. No, kapag late sa klase, no, which means you are not allowed anymore to participate in the groupings, or kapag late sa klase, for example, for about 20 minutes, so you may enter the class but you are good already as absent for that particular subject. So that's a punishment, no, that is also done in the classroom. Now, Skinner also no also look this extinction or the non-reinforcement no, responses that are reinforced and are not likely to be repeated. So example dyan, yung ignoring yung student's misbehavior, may extinguish that behavior. Yung minsan, inahayaan natin maingay yung klase. These are non-reinforcement. No? These are extinction. Na hinayaan na natin sila mag-ingay in the classroom. And then, we continue with our teachings. So these are non-reinforcement. Wala kang reinforcement doon. Wala kang din ginawa doon to condition your class. Okay, even if they are very very noisy already. Then another is yung ating marami pa no actually Boris Skinner is just telling us that this kind of conditioning to do positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. Just remember how it is done and then we're good already. I wish to elaborate further on this concept. It's just that I think reporters also made their part no, to explain to you all of these things. But in a classroom setting, no, ito yung usually nangyayari. We do that, just like for the examples I shared to you earlier. That can be done no, in the classroom. So the next theory that we have, I think the last reporter for this, no, for behavioral approaches, I mean, hindi naman pala last, si Mr. Salapudin, no, on John B. Watson's. What was the theory of John B. Watson's, Mr. Salapudin? What was the implication of the theory now to learning? I think I asked you also that one last time.
Yes, sir. So the implication of John B. Watson's theory,
What was the theory again?
the theory of Watson, sir, bale yung point niya is yung factors is not within the learner, meaning hindi siya genetic. So this is all about external factors, sir.
Mm-hmm. Go on. So what is now an example of a classroom situations that this theory is applicable?
So the one manifestations dyan, sir, is yung yung Little Alberts, yung experiment nila.
Okay.
So si Little Albert kasi, the moment na lalapit siya sa isang daga na yun, the scientists or yung mga psychologists, tinatry nila na mag-ingay kasi at first kasi hindi siya natatakot. So during every time na hahawak siya sa yung daga na yun, mag-iingay yung mga scientists or yung mga psychologists. So along the way, si Little Albert, pag makita niya yung daga na yun, parang natatakot na siya. So yung sa experiment na yun, yung malaki talaga yung impact ng external factor kesa sa kung ano yung ano ba yan, no? Parang ganun, sir, yung in-explain.
Yes. Using this kind of concept or of conditioning, can you give me an example of a classroom situations where this is applied?
Yes, sir. So, isa dyan, sir, yung gaya ng in-explain mo kanina is yung positive reinforcement. So, the moment kasi yung child is parang may praise silang nare-receive, or for example, may mga sandali, sir, ha? Parang may motivation na nare-receive yung mga bata. For example, kung mapa-perfect nyo yung exam na to, or hindi kayo mag-iingay, hindi kayo mag-absent, may plus points kayo na mare-receive. So the learner, yun yung parang nagiging motivation nila na hindi mag-ingay, or kung ma-perfect nila, may makukuha silang reward.
Okay. Okay, no, that is also somehow no related to the idea of Watsons. But this is one thing that you have to just simply understand on John B. Watson's no. Um, yung sa kanya dito is he's also a believer of Pavlov's work. Yun na talaga, no? Believer siya ng Pavlov's work. He is also using the same style of Pavlov's, no? This is using an animal, no? And then later on, John Watsons are involved in the human behavior research. So pinasukan nila yung human behavior. He is much concerned of the human behavior. Yun yung sa kanya. So naniniwala lang si John B. Watsons on this concept that bilang tao, bilang mga tao, no, we have only this very few reflexes of our emotional reactions to love and rage, no? And the rest of that, yung concept na dito is through to responding, no, to or through stimulus response association, no? So yung ating concept of stimulus response, no? So he believed, no, that the power of this kind of conditioning so much, no, that makes, no, infants, no, healthy infants can make them into anything you want them to be. Ibig sabihin, by giving them no, more opportunities. These are now the stimuli. Okay, by giving them more privileges, which is the same, no? It's also a stimuli. Their normal response would be grabbing these opportunities and these privileges to become successful. So he believes that any healthy infants, no, can make them into anything you want them to be. Ibig sabihin, ano ka lang, bigay ka lang ng ano pwede mong ibigay dyan, and then they would be somebody else in the future. So yun yung sa kanya, he believes on that concept, no, through this kind of stimulus response connections. So in a classroom situation, if we get to apply this kind of concept of Watson's, we usually, no, yung halimbawa yung rewarding system, yung giving of opportunities for children, that we allow children we allow students to have these free opportunities, no? That when they, for example, if they, for example, wanted to learn, no, in a faster way, so opportunities of access to internet, for example, the opportunity to freely go into the library, no? And these are a way, no, of reinforcing now also learnings, no? If these are all provided, we expect that their response would be going to the library, using the internet also to search their assignments, for examples. So yun yung sa kanya, no, if we provide that opportunity. Even if at home, no, nagagamit natin itong klase ng conditioning din. Halimbawa, madalas to na nagiging ano sa mga parents who are very busy with work. So ang ginagawa ng parents usually para makabawi sa anak is to provide opportunities. So ibig sabihin, nasuspoil natin yung ating mga anak with luxury of things and of materials. So because we believe that through giving them these things, which we think it's a stimuli, they would also respond na, because they are provided with all of these things, then they will do better. Okay, so yun yung parang concept natin on that. But let me remind you that this kind of concept, no, sometimes tayo, no, failure tayo na hindi yung nagiging result for them to become better. So actually yung ginamit ni John Watson's on the very simple concept of this kind of understanding, no, is that yung paggamit niya kang Albert, sinabi nga ni Mr. Winston, yung kang Albert, that Albert is not actually afraid of a rat, no? Hindi siya takot sa daga, okay, but he usually touch the rat, even purchase the rat or whatever, but he's not afraid of the rat. But condition Albert, okay, to be afraid of rats, which Albert is afraid of sounds, no, a very freaky sounds. So yung ginawa, no, to condition Albert for that, to be afraid of a rat, is playing that freaky sounds while Albert is trying is attempting no to touch again the rat. So every time Albert would touch the rat, there's a sound being played no that is freaky to hear, and Albert would already now be hesitated to touch the rat. So it's a conditioning na kapag the moment na tinatouch niyo yung rat, Albert could hear that sound. So in the same concept, no, ang nangyayari, every time that Albert see an animal, a small animal, natatakot po siya. So that's a conditioning na ginawa ni Albert. So yun yung sa kanya, no? Because again, we have these very few reflexes and and emotional reactions of love and of rage. No, yun yung gusto ni Albert. So I was just trying to relate that very simple concept to a classroom situation. So given no na meron tayong ganyang klase ng kind of students, no, you may use this also in disciplining. Actually, this kind of conditioning may be done also in your classroom management again, no, to discipline your students. Sometimes ginagamit pa nga natin to pantakot, di ba? Common din na ginagamit natin pantakot. Halimbawa, if you are familiar with Maria Labu, di ba? So, you know that Maria Labu was a known wakwak, no, or a known, how do you call that in English? Basta is a known, no, na multo, hindi naman siya multo, no? Parang aswang. Okay? So, usually, kids before, when they heard of Maria Labo, no, parang they feel that Maria Labo was powerful, Maria Labo was really very, very, talaga, no? That famous kasi they even sang no about Maria Labo and everything. So kina-condition ng mga parents before is that at 6 p.m. you need to be at home because Maria Labo will be roaming around and Maria Labo would eat kids. So this is also another way, no? But students wouldn't believe that concept, no? Would not believe the concept. So meron pa nga nagsasabi pa na sila mismo kakain ka Maria Labo. But some parents made up stories, okay? Made up stories that Maria Labo is already in the town. Maria Labo has already ate already 2 kids in the town. So these are already the conditioning that you are telling your kids now for them to really be afraid of Maria Labo and that they would really have to stay at home before 6 p.m. So this is a kind also of condition that you can done at home, no, as a part of discipline. The same goes in classrooms. There could be so many ways for you to use this kind of conditioning just to be able to maintain a good classroom management because this is particular behavior conditioning is very very useful, no, for any teachers for you, no, in the future. Okay? So, yun lang siguro ang kalalating ma-remember dyan. Again, no, let me reiterate, John B. Watson's was also, no, an American psychologist to work with Pavlov's ideas. Also believe that Pavlov's ideas of the stimulus response associations. So, ginagamit niya yun. But sa kanya dito is more on unlike Pavlov talaga is using also the meat and etc. Almost similar actually sila. Nauna lang kasi si Pavlov over Watson, and Watson is also trying to copy that concept but on a different different way. Okay, so moving on, I think the last topic. Yes, Miss Tombok, are you raising your hand?
Yes sir, may I ask lang po sir, question. Kasi sir, I found a video something in the internet that describes Watson's as yung characteristics na ma-derive dun sa theory ni Watson. Meron siyang imitation, practice, reinforcement, and habit formation. Is this also, sir, kasama ba yan siya, sir, dun sa, if ever, kasama ba din po ito kung if ever mag-exam tayo? Yung...
Okay. Sa akin lang naman, no, in a way, ang sa akin lang is that you would understand ano yung theory nila, no, ano yung contribution nila to behaviorist. Remember, the report that I gave to the reporters were classified according to different approaches. So for behaviorist approaches, there were only four. Ang sa akin lang doon, if you get to study, is that you would take note of their contribution to the behaviorist approach that is useful in a classroom situation. So yun lang. Kasi kung titingnan mo nga kahit si ano pa no, kahit sino ba to no, yung si Skinner, meron pa siyang ibang studies of theory na pwede mong pasukan. So do not complicate yourself to learning all of those things. So sa akin lang, according to how they are classified in the reports, let's say for behaviorist, focus lang doon. And then yung simple examples nila. Okay? Yun lang, para hindi kayo masyadong maano.
Thank you, sir.
Kasi ako tutuusin nga, nagmamadali na tayo with our lesson, no? Kaya nga medyo we cannot go with our deeper explanations and discussions on the different topics kasi nga kulang na tayo sa oras. So that's why I just wanted you to limit your study on the very very basic concept of their contribution to the different approaches accordingly. Yung behaviorist ba, yung cognitive at saka yung humanistic, kasi doon naman din talaga yung naka-pattern lahat. Okay, can we move on? I think the last for behaviorist approach, no, meron tayong pang-apat. We have the Thorndike's connectionism. Andito si Lisa Paila. Lisa Paila, are you here? Okay, so for behavioral approaches, we have again classical conditioning, operant conditioning, John B. Watson's also for behavioral approaches, and Thorndike's connectionism. Now for Thorndike's connectionism, let me just review on this. Edward Thorndike's connectionism theory gives us actually the original S&R framework of the behavioral psychology. So S stands for the stimuli, and the R stands for the response. This is an association or habits that are strengthened or weakened by the nature on the frequency of the stimulus and response pairings. So, kaya nga kung may stimuli, mayroon din talagang response. So this kind of model theory was a trial and error learning in which certain responses came to be repeated more than others. So that's why the main principle of the connectionism, like all behavioral theory, was that learning could be adequately explained, without looking into consideration any unobservable internal states. So Thorndike actually states this that the learning has taken place when a strong connection or bond between stimulus and response is formed. Sa kanya naman dito, di ba, remember, kaya nasabi ko kanina, hindi ibig sabihin that because there is an available stimuli, your response are ano siya tawag dito? Projected, expected. Ibig sabihin, yun talaga dapat ang expected mo na response if there is a stimuli. Because this could be another way around na response na pwede mo ibigay to that stimuli. So, yun yung idea ni Thorndike. Ibig sabihin, not all the stimuli and response relationships are that very, very strong. So, ibig sabihin, ang gusto niya dito ay kinakailangan yung bond both of these stimuli should be very strong. Should be very strong. So halimbawa dito, meron siyang three primary laws for Thorndike. Just remember these three primary laws: yung law of effect, the law of exercise, and the law of readiness. So I think the reporter made mention about this. I hope so, wala ako nito nung nag-explain. So, but anyway, I will just quickly share these three laws. For the law of effect, it's a connection between the stimulus and response is strengthened when the consequence is a positive one. O kung halimbawa may reward, and the connection between the stimulus and the response is weakened when the consequence is negative. So actually, this law of effect were revised eventually by Thorndike by also adding negative rewards or the punishment which is not necessarily weekend bans, and that some seemingly pleasurable consequences. No? So yung punishment, the reward, and the punishment. So in the classroom settings, we do this already, and we do this also. No? Yung reward and then punishment. Example of reward, kaya nga sinabi natin that for those group who would perform better or would perform or would cooperate in a class activity, they will be the first one to take the recess. O, di ba? Parang usually ginagawa yan ng mga teachers. So for those who can finish writing, or could have could at least perform first, they will be the first one also to take the recess. So that's a positive or a reward, no? Yung punishment natin doon, pag sinasabi natin na for those who will be the last group to finish, they will take the recess siguro after how many number of minutes. So they will be the last one to mga ganyan. So these are punishment that is also done for kids in school or for students in the classrooms. So that's the law of effect. Ang law of exercise, it tells us more of the relationship of the stimulus and response, that is practice. The stronger it will become, yung sinasabi natin practice makes perfect, it seems to be associated with that kind of concept. However, like the law of effect, the law of exercise also had to be revised when Thorndike found that the practice without feedback does not necessarily enhance performance. It is very important that there is always a feedback to any practice. It will strengthen. Diyan na natin nakukuha yung idea that every after the reportings or every after the trainings, for example, we hear feedbacks coming from participants. We hear feedbacks from our teachers, from our mentors. So the idea of that, that by hearing these feedbacks, this will strengthen the bond of stimuli and response. Okay. While the law of readiness, it states that more readiness the learner has to respond to the stimulus, the stronger will be the bond between them. So if you are ready to respond to a stimulus and it's not made to respond, hindi ka pinilit to respond, it becomes annoying actually to any person. For example, when a teacher would say, okay, we will now watch the movie. So by saying that, that's your stimulus, the movie that you've been waiting for, and suddenly the power goes off, the blackout. Yan talaga uso sa buhanga. The students will feel frustrated because they were ready to respond to the stimulus that was prevented from doing so because nagkaroon yan ng blackout. So supposedly, mag-film viewing sila and they were excited, they were happy, na sana mapanood na nila yun, pero biglang nag-blackout sa Zamboanga. So biglang na-disappoint yung mga bata. Bigla silang na-frustrate because of that. So likewise, yung kanina example yun if they are ready. But likewise, if the person is not ready at all, or ready to respond to a stimuli and is asked to respond, that is also becomes annoying. For instance, now the teacher will not call a student to stand up and recite. Diba? Common yan. Okay, yung Mr. R say, please stand up and answer a question. So if you're not ready, your normal reaction would be feeling surprised. Minsan natatakot. Minsan nabablock out, which means mawawala ka na sa mo if kung ano yung sasabihin mo. So that is annoying for the students. So the teacher would ask a question and expect the student to respond right away when he's still not ready. So this will be annoying actually to any student. That is why teachers should remember to say the question first and wait for the few seconds before calling on to anyone to answer. So remember that, future teachers, when you, for example, call for a recitation, you say the question first before calling the student. But sometimes, it happens the other way around. I myself is also a tawag nito, tawag nito, yung parang, din ako dito, guilty din ako nito, I am also guilty to this kind of concept. Because sometimes I forgot this. I call your name first before I say the question. But what is proper actually is that you say the question first, no? And then allow everybody to think na ano kaya yun, and then you call the name. No? So ganun dapat, no? That's a proper way of doing recitations. That's the law of readiness according to Edward Thorndike. Okay, so remember the teachers, huh? So when you, for example, ask for questions, you say the question first and give your student a few minutes or seconds to reflect on the questions, and then before calling a name. So ayun yung proper. But I myself is a guilty one. No? Sometimes I call your name before I'll say the question. Sometimes good po, no? Pag wala na nga mga concerns, minsan ba, pag isabihin ko na agad yung tanong, abtik, dayon na makasearch sa Google, no? Parang i-search dayon ang question para na ma-ready na din ang answer po. So, in terms of law of readiness, talagang ready. Kasi i-search pa dahil sa internet. So, minsan maganda yung itawagin mo din yung pangalan muna, the surprise. Siyempre, wala lang time na mag-search kasi nga open cam naman. So, then that's also another way. But again, these are a theory that anyone could either follow or anyone could either resist. But for you, teachers of the basic education, one thing, teaching elementary or probably high schools, you may do this in the classroom because actually it's a better way. And I myself would agree that this is a better way of doing recitation in the class. So what else? I think it's the 4 behaviorist approaches that you have to remember. No? Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, John B. Watsky's, no? And the other one is the the Thorndike's collectionism theory. Okay, so moving on, we have also the humanistic approaches. Okay, for the humanistic approaches, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Andito ba si Ma'am Tumbok? Can we transfer
Yes,
to
sir.
another link? Can you make the link now, Miss Anjarani? We will transfer there para tuloy-tuloy tayo.
Okay, sir.